Okay, so in a previous tutorial, we set up a small world here to get started, get ready to work with animations for our character. So while we're doing that, I installed this asset pack, which is a character which comes with a lot of sprite animations. Sprite sheet animations, that's the traditional animations with lots of pictures, and we put the pictures together in rapid order and play them very quickly, and it kind of creates the illusion of movement. That's the easier type of animation to get working with. There's also a version where we have the character and basically draw a little skeleton in it, and then we have the computer move that skeleton, and the image of the character follows its bone structure. It's a little harder to get started working with, but so we'll just do a sprite sheet here, sprite sheet animation. So we downloaded all these assets from the Unity Asset Store. This was just a free one for a random character. We have all these different things you could do. So there's this crouch animation, a run animation, an idle animation here. So just to go over these quickly, let's just put together an idle animation and then a run animation. That way when he's standing still and moving around the screen, we can see it looks a little better than just a still picture moving back and forth. So to work with animations, we want to come to Window, Animation, and we want the animation window. It pulls up this little window, which you'll notice all of the buttons on here are grayed out right now. And that's because each animation has to be linked to a particular game object. So when we come over here to the hierarchy and select our ninja object, the character we stuck in here, you notice now there's a button to create an animation clip. So if we hit create, pull up the file explorer, and we can kind of come up to the assets folder and create a new folder to put our animations in. Create that. And this animation is going to be Ninja Idle. That's a good one to start with. So that gives us what's called a dope sheet. It's basically the timeline that we want those pictures to go into. So where's the idle animation start? Is this an idle one? So we get a little preview over here. So there's idle 1, idle 2, idle 3, idle 4, idle 5, idle 6, and from flipping through them, then we're into jump animations. So from idle 1 to idle 6, so I'll just select the first one and hold down shift and click the last one to select everything in between. It looks like it's just him standing there with his head bobbing up and down a little. And with all of them selected, we can just drag them into the dope sheet. And now to preview it, even in scene mode, we can go and hit play. And the first thing you'll notice is 60 samples a second is probably way too quick for a 5-frame animation. So let's slow that down, maybe 12. Let's see how that looks. There we go. Yeah, so he's standing still, his head bobbing around a little, just waiting to move. So that's our first animation. And now we can create another one for when he's running. So same thing, only now our create button is over here on this list, so we see the one we're looking at. And if we hit this, we'll have a create new clip option. Let's give it a name, so I'll call it Ninja Running. And we get back to a blank dope sheet, so we can just select all of our run animations. What do we have here? Jump, jump, jump. There's run. So run starts there and probably goes glancing at these pictures. This is probably a run as well. Yeah, so 11 frames on the run. Where do you start at here? Oh, that's a jump. So from there, hold shift and click the last one to select everything in between. Then just drag those into the dope sheet. And we can hit play to preview it. And once again, 60 frames a second might be a little quick for this animation. So maybe try 17. That looks a little bit better. That'll work for now. So you just adjust the sample rate until the images look good, until you're happy with them. We can switch back and forth, see which one's which. And that's all it takes to set up the sprite sheet animations. Once you have the sprite, just go to Window, Animation, Animation to get this window, the dope sheet, and then create a new clip and drag whatever images you want for that clip, for that particular animation into the dope sheet. So those are set up, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. And now if we go to that animation folder we created, so under Assets, we have this folder Animations. So there's those two animations, Ninja Idle and Ninja Running. And there's this other thing here. This is what's called an animator. So this is where we control all our little animation scripts. So if we double click on that, we'll get the animator window. And you'll notice it gives us a graphical way to connect our animations. So right now, entry, that's going to be the start. So the first thing it does is go to the idle animation. So if we run it now, we should see the character in that idle animation. So I'm going to come back over to scene and hit run to give that a preview. So now you can see when the game running, the character's head bobs a little to show he's waiting. And if we click on the animator window, we can see the highlighting to show which animation is currently running. And notice we transition from the start into that idle animation, but nothing moves from this idle to the running. So if we come back over to the game and try to move, it's still just that animation. So we need a way to transition from the standing still into the running animation, and then back from the running animation into the standing still animation. So if we go over to the animator window, we can click on any of these, right click on any animation, and we'll have this option to make transition. And that'll bring out this little arrow that indicates a movement from this animation down to this animation. So now we have a way to get from the idle animation to the running animation. And we just need to know when to do that. So if we click on it, over in the inspector, we'll get some different options about it. This one we want to have instantaneously, so we can uncheck this has exit time. So it can just happen immediately, or leave it checked and turn this little video graph here represents the transition time. You can see from the picture, it's part idle animation, getting less idle animation and more running animation to make a smooth transition. But for our purposes, we'll just make that a very short transition. And we need to know when it happens. We'll do that with a condition. Right now, there's no conditions. But you'll notice over here in the animator window, we have these two tabs, layers and parameters. If we set parameters, we can create some variables to control this. So I'm going to create a new variable, a Boolean, and I'll call it is running, which by default will be set to false. So that if is running is false, we'll be showing the idle animation, and if is running is true, we'll show the Ninja running animation. And so that'll be our condition here in the condition list. We'll add a new condition, and we'll change from idle to running if is running is true. And then we can create another transition the same way to go the other way. So right click on Ninja running, make transition, and drag that back to the idle, and select the transition. And we can set it for a very short period of time. We just stop immediately for this example. We don't need a smooth transition between them. And then for our condition, we'll go that way whenever is running is set to false. So that gives us our animations, when to change between them. So now we just need to change that variable from a script or our bolt macro. So we'll do it in the bolt macro here. If we just go into our graph window here for the macro, I'll go ahead and double click on that to maximize it. So we have this value to tell or to control whether we're moving or not. So one thing an easy way to set this up to control that animation variable is we can just check and see if that input axis is active or not. And remember that returns -1 if the A key is being pressed, a 0 if neither key is being pressed, or a +1 if the D key is being pressed. So as long as if that value is not equal to 0, if it's not equal to 0, then we want to show the run animation or set that is running variable to true. So we can bring a second branch off here over the side somewhere, and we want to check the logical condition to see whether that is equal or less than, greater than, not equal. In this case, we'll go with not equal. So if that is not equal to the float literal 0, remember 0 means the key is not being pressed. So if it's not equal to 0, then that means we are pushing either the A or D key. And we want to set that running animation control boolean to true, because we want that is running animation to show when we're moving. So from here we can drag out and we'll set a branch for our flow. So after we make the movement adjustment, we'll check to see if we moved or not. And if we did, so if that's true, that the key press is not 0, then we can look for animator set boolean. Animator set bool unit will give us access to that variable. And right now, by default, it applies to itself. If we come over here and look at the components on our Ninja game object, when we scroll through here, notice when we set up those animations, we now have this animator component, which is the one showing here. So we can access anything about this animation, in particular these parameters for our animator, by simply referring to this game object, which this script is connected to that game object, so we can just refer to the self. Then what boolean do we want to check for? So if we'll bring this out and look for a string literal, we'll enter it as a string. And notice the orange coloring, it's expecting a string to come in, and we called that is running, written in camel case. So if the value of the horizontal axis is not 0, which means either the A key or the D key is being pressed, and if neither one's being pressed, it's 0, so then this is false. But if they are being pressed, then we will change that is running variable to true, which will change our animation. But if they're not being pressed, I'll move this over here. If they're not being pressed, we kind of want to do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy both of these. And remember, the Boolean, we'll bring this out and enter a Boolean literal. And if this box is unchecked, it's false. And if the box is checked, it's true. So if that's not 0, then that means we are running. So we want that to be true. And if it is running, we'll just copy all of these, Control C to copy. paste them in here. And I'll move these down here out of the way. And if that is equal to 0, so this condition is false, well, then we want to set that Boolean, the same is running Boolean, to false. So if it's true, we will, if the key is being pressed, we'll set that variable to true, which should activate that transition to the running animation. And if the keys are not being pressed, this condition is false, so it will set that is running variable to false, which will transition back into the idle animation. So let's give that a run and see if that worked. So with the game running, you can see we start in our idle animation. Now when we press the D key, the character runs. In the A key, we also get the running animation, except the character's facing the wrong way. So the last thing to look at real quick here, let's look at a quick, easy way to make the character turn around when we move to the left. So I'll stop this. And you may have noticed in this folder of images, all these images face to the right. So our sprite animations can only be looking this way. So we need another way to turn that around. If we select the character here in the transform, remember most of what we've seen in these tutorials is about the position. Rotation is self-explanatory, but the scale. Right now we have a scale of 1, 1, 1 in every axis. But if we turn this X scale to a -1, notice the character turns around. So that's all we need to do to switch those animations from facing right to facing left. We can just change the transform scale, switch the X value from between positive or -1, depending on whether the A or D key is pressed, which direction the character is moving. And doing so is things we've kind of seen before. Just things here in our bolt macro that we've seen before. We'll just set them up slightly different than we did the previous time. So the same way we got this control to see if that key is being pressed, we can check if it's either the A or D key. Because if it's 0, the key is not being pressed. -1 means the A key is being pressed. And a +1 means the D key is being pressed. So if we drag another section out here, just like we made that comparison to make sure it's not equal, we could just check either less or more than 0. So I'll just select less. So if that input axis, the horizontal input axis, is less than 0, well, that means the A key is being pressed. And in that case, we want our character facing to the left. So after we do all of this stuff, I'll use the is running true. So if is running is true, well, that's going to make a big difference whether we face right or left. So after that, I'll bring that out and make another branch in the code, which will be controlled from this condition. And this will return true if the A key is being pressed, which means we want the character to face left, which means we need the scale, the transform scale, to have an X of -1 and a Y of Z of +1. So we'll drag out from the true branch, look for transform set local scale. And transform set local scale. And we have these boxes we can type into. So we're going to apply it to the self and we want to change that scale to a -1, 1, 1. But if this condition is false, then that means the A key is not being pressed. And if no keys are being pressed, then this condition is false. So it's going to go to the idle animation. Set is running to false, transition back to the idle animation. So if this condition is false, that means we are running, and the D key will be pressed. If it's not the A key, then it must be the D key. So once again, we can set the local transform, which is probably easier just to copy this one, Control C, Control V, than to search through the Finder for it since it's right here. Connect that to our flow. And if the D key is being pressed, we want the scale to be all positive ones, which is facing the right. So if the A key is pressed, which means the value of the axis is less than 0, that would be true. We'll set the X scale to a -1, which turns character left. And if the D key is being pressed, we'll set the X scale to a +1, which means the character will face to the right. So let's give that a run and test that. So when the character starts off here, it's in the idle animation, and we can see that our first condition, no key is being pressed, not equal to 0, that means false for the horizontal axis. And coming in here is less than 0, but it's sending exactly 0, so it's not less than. If I push the D key, our character starts moving right. And push the A key, the character turns around and moves left, and we can see the values here change. If I zoom in someplace, okay, yeah. So if I push the D key, we can see this now passes false. Push the A key, now passes true. And that adjusts which way it changes. And that's basically what all there is to animations in Unity. We just set up simple things like that. We just create the sprite, bring in a sprite sheet, create the animations, and then an animator object, set up some parameters to control it, and then in our bolt macro, we can set up conditions to adjust those parameters controlling the animation. So hopefully that's enough to get you started with animations. You'll want to do, kind of mess around with things. Some of them you might need to add more parameters, such as a jump animation. You might need to add a couple of parameters to tell if the character, not just that the character is jumping, but whether they're on when they get back to the ground, so that the jump animation plays the whole time they're in the air, which might take more than one parameter. But if you start messing around with it, it should fall in place fairly quickly. It'll all follow that pattern. Set up a parameter in the animator, and then use the either bolt macro or C# script to control the values of those parameters, and the animations will automatically switch to follow what the parameter says. But hopefully that'll get you started.